All right, so today I want to build a nice simple and easy table for the shop. And this table only uses about 2 sheets of plywood, so it's pretty affordable. You can use it for an outfeed table, an assembly table. I'll be using mine for a CNC, which will be here in a few days. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing I do is trim off the factory edge. And I feel like this step is missed often, but it's really important to do so because it gives you a nice clean edge to work off of and it makes the finished piece look better. From there, it's on to measuring and cutting out my oversized panel for the tabletop. And I like using a track saw for this procedure, but if you don't have a track saw, you can use a circular saw and a straight edge. And once the top was cut out, I cut down some panels for my stretchers and legs. All right guys, so we're gonna cut out the legs, rails, and sides next. I have the table saw fence set to the left of the saw to give me some more working area. We'll get that set up and we'll get going. So first I set the saw at 4 inches to cut the wider stretchers and legs. These pieces will meet against another 3 1/4 inch piece that'll create a nice 4-inch square leg assembly. Now being that I'm right-handed, this setup was a little tricky, but if you're ambidextrous or a lefty, this is a walk in the park. With the 4-inch pieces done, I could move the fence to 3 1/4 and cut my remaining pieces. Oh, and if you want to build this table for yourself, I'll have plans for this project linked in the description below. Once I had the panels down to more manageable sizes, I went ahead and moved the fence back to the right side, just to feel more natural. And from there I could mark out the pieces to their final length before cutting them at the crosscut sled. For the center stretchers, I just cut those as one single piece. However, when it came to doing repeat cuts, I set up a stop block on the crosscut sled to give me more accuracy. And what this does is it allows for any errors to be continued through the entire build. If I'm off a little here, it'll be off consistently on every piece. And if you're curious about this crosscut sled, click the card above. So for the legs, what we're gonna do is put some dominoes into the edge, and then that'll make a nice 4-inch square leg for us. We're gonna add dominoes along this edge and along this face, just to reference against one another and add a little bit more strength to the joint. Then we'll glue and screw these pieces together, and we'll have a couple of leg assemblies. So next I threw my 4-inch piece in the vise and aligned the 3 1/4 inch piece to the edge. I marked out the placement for a couple dominoes. Now you don't have to use dominoes for this, I just wanted a nice reference point for the edge, but you could also use biscuits if you don't have a domino. Just make sure that the dominoes go into the edge of your 3 1/4 inch pieces and the face of your 4-inch pieces. Oh, and prices for plywood have come down for me, but let me know in the comments below what you're seeing in your area, because I'm always watching, kind of like Alexa. So next it was time to assemble the legs, and for that I'll be using glue and screws. So first I put the dominoes on one side before applying glue to the edge, pre-drilling and driving in some 1 1/4 inch screws. And as an added option, you could plug these holes and then trim them flush so they'd pretty much be invisible. So next we're going to attach the side stretcher to the legs. And to do that, we're going to use some brad nails and some glue and some screws. But first I need to get a piece of scrap and flush the top of this piece up so that piece of scrap sits even with the top of the legs. And this will allow for the top of the table to sit flush inside of the legs. And then I'm going to apply my glue and some brad nails to this side. Once I felt that the top would sit flush, I went ahead and checked for square, then fired in a few brad nails before driving in 4 screws. And when it comes to screws, I like using Torx, but if you have a preferred screw, leave it in the comments. I struck a line about 2 inches from the bottom and then attached the bottom stretcher in the same fashion as the top. Then quickly repeated the process for the other side. With both short sides assembled, I went ahead and attached the longer stretchers to one side. And if you're enjoying this project, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I really appreciate your support. Now I've dropped everything down to the floor to go ahead and install the other sub-assembly onto this. And we're gonna do it in the same way. This was just a little more challenging to film given the position, but I think you get the idea. Now, it might be super wobbly right now. Actually, it's pretty sturdy, but we're gonna add 2 supports into the center, and then once the top gets dropped in and the bottom gets dropped in, it'll stop this thing from racking quite a bit. So let's go ahead and get the middle in. So I just marked the center and then dropped in the center support. I used a parallel clamp to hold the support in place while I checked it for square and then drove in a couple screws. Next, I trimmed the top to its final width. Now we left this a little oversized to trim back to, which we'll do here in a second. So once I confirmed the final length, I trimmed it down with a track saw. And fortunately, it dropped in like Tony Hawk. Perfect. I followed a similar process for the bottom shelf. Just make sure that this piece is undersized so that it fits underneath the table, and cut another section to fill in the gap. Oh, and try to remember to connect your dust hose if you got one. From there, I glued the bottom shelf in by only putting a couple dabs of glue in the corners. A small amount of glue will allow me to replace this if I ever need to. To finish the sides and flush up the side stretchers, I cut out some strips that will go on as caps for the edges. Now this is completely optional and it isn't structural, but I think it makes the table look nicer. I attached them to the side with some glue and some 23 gauge brad nails. All right guys, so that's about it. So you could choose to put some finish on the table or you don't have to, but it's ready for use. You could put your CNC on it. You could use it as an outfeed table. You could use that as an assembly table. Pretty much any table you need in the shop. So if you enjoyed this build, give this video a like, subscribe, watch this video next, and I'll see you next time.